So we have a short panel, 20 minutes, so I'm going to get straight to the questions to all the panelists. And I'm going to start off by asking Arman, because we've heard the government side. We'd love to know the social sector and the disability side too. Arman, both the government and the disability sector primarily think of accessibility in terms of physical infrastructure and not really technology. What do you think really needs to change, especially from the government's perspective, to ensure technology is focused upon when talking about disability?
Nipun, looks like a mystery to me as well. But if you look at disability traditionally, it's more, the symbol itself is often wheelchair, and one related the disability with a physical disability. And people who had other disabilities were not visible at all. And technology is something which is a new phenomena which has happened from last 10 years or so. So it's taking that much time. And I think Nikunj sir did mention a lot of, yes, Mr. Nikunj made a lot of reference to the new law. I think from now on, it is the law, the Rights of Persons with Disability Act mandates that all services, whether government or private, must be made accessible for people with disability. So now I think there is no choice left for the government to look away, or the private sector to look away, that we did not know, or we're doing it for to do good kind of a thing. It mandates. And also taking it from Nikunj, Honorable Prime Minister talks about, he's very passionate about technology, it was his firm belief that, that is the power in IT, he believed in that. And one thing is very clear, and we must very clearly understand that everything is about information technology. And an Honorable Prime Minister, he introduced something like MyGov, the portal, where the citizen of this country could participate into the governance system. You participate in everything. Imagine if people with disability who were left out of this process, because when you make such initiatives, when you make such portals, you don't think there is a section of people with disability who are not able to access these services because it is not made thinking their need in mind. And it's criminal. You immediately look at disabled people as a second-class citizen of this country. So I think from now on, and the Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016 comes with a timeline. It said that in 2 years, all the services by all sectors done would be made accessible. And I think in June, we have crossed that deadline. I think it's high time that all of us should put our act together and take it, more action than talks.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come to Mr. Dinesh next, who's worked a lot on accessibility standards, not just in India, but all over the world. So we were speaking about the European standards before this event. Where does India really stand in terms of accessibility standards for technology, procurement policies, etc.? And can cities really be smart without looking at accessibility in that sense?
Okay, thank you. Before I could talk about India, to be precise, let me give you a little bit flavor of what is happening in EU. When you talk about accessibility, the work in Europe started way back in 1998, when European Commission issued a mandate, which is basically a request towards the European Standards Organization to develop standards for accessibility, especially with persons with disability. That's when the work started, but real Kickstarter and the work began on the standardization part of it, but UNCRPD, which Sir also presented, was a real Kickstarter, which was ratified in EU in 2010. That kickstarted a lot of real work around standardization. And I would only talk about one particular standard, while there are many standards when you talk about accessibility, but there is one particular standard which is EN 301549. Now, this particular standard is for public procurement. It is a kind of guideline then when you do a public procurement for ICT part of it, ensure that it is accessible for persons with disability. Now, this is the one particular standard which has been implemented in EU, has been assessed, and this is not only a standard in terms of guideline, but this also comes with tools. So for example, if public procurement has any kind of ICT procurement, this tool will generate the guidelines for the tenders. Now they can copy paste those guidelines and put it as part of tenders, which will ensure that whatever ICT procurement is happening, this will also be for accessibility part as well. Very important standard. Now, we have been working in Indian side because while it looks like a European, work started in Europe, but this has become a global standard now.
Right.
Because UN has recognized it, South Africa has implemented it, Americas have implemented it. Even this particular standard is harmonized with US Rehabilitation Act, Section 508. So even if from a numbering perspective, it says European norm 301549, it's a global standard. Now, it's not specific to product or services. It's a very generic standard. It could be adopted, implemented as it is. We need not to transpose, we need not to apply a full process of BIS to transpose it. Of course, they can do it. They can make it as an Indian standard. There's no problem. But as it is, it could be implemented. Now, we have been working with the Indian side, be it Bureau of Indian Standard, be it Ministry of Electronics and IT, to fast adopt or notify that this standard should be implemented whenever there is a public procurement. We have not succeeded until now. People are aware of it. But I think if you see it from an act perspective, all the provisions are there. From a policy perspective, everything is there. But when you see it on a real implementation ground in India, implementation is not happening. Now, why it is not happening? Because I think a standard like 301549 have not been notified, not been informed to the various ministries that please ensure when you do a public procurement, you have to comply to this standard. So that is what I want it to happen in India. So it's missing. So in my opinion, even if public procurement are happening, it is not happening in compliance with the accessibility. Okay, sir, I'll speak to him. And we discussed about JAM also, because when we discussed with Mighty, we thought of that JAM will be a right place to park it so that the procurement can happen. But that's where we are right now. Now going back to your second part of the question, when you talk about smart cities. I work on smart cities as well. If I see smart cities proposal, they are majorly talking about transport, energy, wastewater. But all of the smart city proposals, because it was guided by the center, they missed out this accessibility part. Now, when you talk about a smart city, you talk about smart citizens. But then you do talk about inclusiveness. This inclusiveness was missed out. We had round of discussions through various chambers of commerce to ensure that whatever procurement are happening, even if it is happening on a vertical basis, right now, if you see smart cities, the rollout are happening smart lighting or some waste, very staggered, not like unified. And there is a 55% component on all of the smart city proposal, which is ICT. So you can imagine smart cities means 55% of ICT component. This is the right time we must ensure that whatever procurement are happening, it is also for accessibility part as well. In my opinion, it is missing. A lot need to be done. And we should continue our efforts to ensure that whatever future procurement happens, they have to happen in compliance with the EN 301549. That's what I can share. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Alok, we've been speaking a lot about accessibility and how it will help persons with disabilities. But what a lot of people here might not realize, as we were talking earlier, is that how it helps the elderly too, and after all, everybody is temporarily able-bodied in that sense. So would you like to highlight a bit of that and also give some examples from Microsoft? And
Sure. I think if I were to go back to our company mission, which is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more, we won't be true to our mission if we haven't looked at every person. And it's in every person and in every context. That context could be a permanent disability, a temporary disability, or a situational disability. As we think about people of all walks of life, it is important for us to keep that in context of how we design our technologies. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. We are far from getting to a position where we are able to address every scenario. But there are a couple of instances that truly stand out. And there are many instances across technologies, not just from Microsoft, but outside that truly make the cut. To give you an example, we have situations where the elderly want to play with their grandchildren on an Xbox, and they want to play a game for car racing or shooting. but they are unable to do that because their reflexes may not be as good. A simple example of how we have enabled that is to use a term called copilot, where you can take two controllers and blend them as one. So a child can play with their grandparents in just that manner, which makes it a lot easier. The second example that I've seen people use very strongly is translation. So if you have used Skype, for example, and you're talking to anyone in another geography in a different language, you don't need to worry about translation. You don't need to worry about dictation because we will transcribe. So you remove the language barriers for people who are elderly and need to talk to somebody else for certain services. They don't need to do that. The third example is just around how we look at as you grow old, your vision may get impaired over a period of time. How do you create an environment that does not require them to buy technologies that are very different? So even in simple tools that they may be using like MS Office, you have the opportunity to do things like high contrast or just change the gradient of the brightness right within the operating system so that when an elderly logs in, it becomes easier for them to participate in a machine that could be shared between multiple people. And the last scenario is how we are using technology to make it easier for people to log in. The example that Balindu gave this evening was around Windows Hello. So just my face can help me log in. So if you do not remember your passwords, just your face is good enough for you to get to be included in participating in technology. So every aspect of how you create an environment that is inclusive to everybody is considered. Have we perfected that art? Absolutely. There's a long way to go, but we are at least taking steps to create an environment for everyone to be participative in this tech economy.
Thank you, sir. Going to Nikun sir, you gave a fantastic presentation. It's been 2 years since the Act really came in, as Armand pointed out. And there were some deadlines that within 2 years certain things needed to happen, including making government websites accessible. Only last year, in fact, 9,000 websites were identified because nothing had happened till then. And only around, as per Jan 2018 report, in fact, that's the latest report that I could find, only 917 of those websites were identified out of those 9,000 as immediately to be made accessible, and 104 were made accessible. Even today, a lot of government websites, etc., are not accessible. What is the biggest challenge the Ministry of Social Justice is facing in that sense to
actually
make technology accessible for persons with disabilities?
Yeah. Is it working? Can you hear me? Yeah, actually on this point, we had a review with the minister just about last week. And if you look at the progression of the websites that are becoming accessible, there is around a 20% increase almost per year. Because we are finding it that the central government websites are becoming more and more accessible, but we are talking to state governments also. And as I was just pointing out in my presentation, 17 states have just notified the rules. And those are the more sensitive states. And they are the ones that are making their websites accessible. We are talking to all the states, taking them on board. Therefore, if we are going at this 20% rate, it should take 5 years, isn't it? So now 45 to 50% has already been achieved. And the rest we are pushing by the next 1.5 to 2 years, most of the websites actually should become accessible. But if you look at we had done an audit before the Act was passed. And if you look at all these websites, most of them did not pass that test. But the situation is improving, and the ministry is on the job. And believe me, we are very much committed to ensure that these goals are fulfilled.
Right. I think Armand was putting his hand up, so he wanted to say something. Yeah.
No, why this rate of 20%, number one, is my question, sir. And what stops you from following our own guidelines at WGIG, GWA, or W3AC or whatever, or 301 or whatever? What stops us? Okay. I think there is a dearth of the know-how, and there is no system in our country which is promoting these technologies. If there are people who are coming forward with these services, there is no seeker for these services because the intention is not there, sir, mostly. Imagine, for example, this keeps coming to my mind. Imagine Geo, for example. The kind of ecosystem it has, the kind of content, the communication it is having in today's time. And if it ignores people with disability, if Geo, for example, does not remove the barrier of communication which will debar people with disability to be at par with the non-disabled people, it's criminal. I think the government first must promote such startups or such initiatives which is trying to provide solutions for people with disability with technology, like you're doing for Startup India and MSME and so on. Or people who are coming forward to provide such solutions are worrying about their ROIs and so on. There's a need to put some seed money in all that, so that these can be expedited. Okay, it cannot be 20%, and cannot wait for another decade for people with disability to be part of the mainstream society. What is a good thing about technology is that it changes every 3 to 5 years. Every 3 to 5 years, there's a new technology. They're trying to do something new. And mind you, I mean, for all of us to understand that we need to identify specific problems when it comes to IT and solve it. It's not very difficult. It is not as difficult as infrastructure. Imagine if you want to make India's infrastructure disabled friendly, it will take another 50 years. You have to break 90% of the buildings, which is all public owned. I think we need to acknowledge the problem first, and promote these services, promote people who are coming up with solutions, spread the know-how. This know-how for making technology accessible for people with disability should be a hygiene issue, and not something which is look to, you do it for a particular cause because you are a diversity champion, or you are to promote inclusion and so on and so forth.
Right. Thank you so much. Is there any question from the audience, or I'm just going to ask for closing remarks? Oh, sure.
Briefly in continuation to his point, because one is implementation. If we have not achieved 100% implementations, that's one target. And second, when he said the technology is evolving so fast, today we talk about WCAG 2.1, and I'm sure the implementation which has happened is on WCAG 2.0. So in parallel, whichever are in compliance, we must start upgrading them, because technology is evolving. And that's where this, again, I come back to the same standard, EN 301549, that has been updated with WCAG 2.1. So if you refer this standard, it's latest and greatest. But in nutshell, we must start a parallel exercise. Whichever has complied, they should start upgrading it, because WCAG 2.1 is the latest. That should also continue in parallel. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask my final question and request each panelist to answer the same question in 30 seconds, starting with Alok. Alok, what can each one of us, including in the audience, the stage, etc., do to make digital inclusion a reality?
So if there's one thing that I would say, it's just be aware. More often than not, we tend to disregard and not include people with disabilities in the work that we do, in the annual reports and presentations that we prepare, in the applications that we design, in the infrastructure that we set up. So I would encourage everyone to look at the need to be aware about what are the needs of people with disabilities and how they should not be thought through separately. No person left behind is the motto, and I truly believe that technology has the opportunity to make that real. That's really what I would leave you with.
Thank you. Dinesh? I'll come to you with last.
Yeah.
One by one, I'm coming to everybody.
Alok's point. Also, very important that we must realize that 70% of people with disability in India are living in rural areas. And while Belinda was making the presentation, we saw the challenge with the internet. So we must keep all these challenges in mind, and our technology should adapt all environment and not look at only at the metro cities, only looking at people who are living in larger cities with bigger infrastructure. I think is one of the very important issue that we need to keep in mind.
That's also exclusion, so great point, thanks.
If I would like something to happen in India to make it true, I think if Ministry of Social Welfare Justice can issue a simple notification that the procurement should happen in compliance to this EN 301549,
My question is more for, we in the audience and on the stage. What can we do to promote digital inclusion?
Directly addressing, sir.
Okay.
What can we do
Yeah.
in the audience?
Yeah. What can each person here do to promote digital inclusion?
You promote, you tell people, you make more and more people aware of it when you talk about technology. Because more and more people are aware of it, more and more we ask for it, more and more we ask to ensure it. Awareness is another side of it. For example, how many people knows about this standard? How many people knows about this act? There are certain provisions. If provisions are available from a consumer or a citizen's perspective, ask for it, demand for it, ensure that it need to be done, That's what I would like them to come forward and do it.
Thank you so much. Nikun sir?
Yeah, I think one of the points that was being made is absolutely vital, that in technology, actually latecomers have an advantage. Therefore, when WCAG 2.1 is now coming and all these websites that have been now upgraded at 2.0 must be upgraded to 2.1, that point is absolutely well taken. Because we can't actually be landing on the moon when NASA is planning a mission to land on Europa, one of the 79 moons of Jupiter. So we always can't be actually playing catch up. We must, at least in technology, as far as internet and the e-technologies are concerned, India has the largest software manpower in the world, and we are at par with anybody. So therefore, in this, there should be absolutely no excuse to fall behind. And I agree with Arman's point that we need to accelerate beyond this 20-point threshold, so that, this 20% threshold that we have been doing, and we go beyond that, so that very quickly the 2.1 deadlines are met, and we meet the 100% guidelines. There are three barriers that we talked about. First was the battle against the physical barriers, building up ramps, building up disabled-friendly toilets and things like that. Next is the digital divide that needs to be bridged. But the point that I made during my presentation is, as the digital technologies move faster, unless accessibility of persons with disability is also integrated with this whole thing at the same pace, actually technology can widen the gap between the general population and persons with disability. And that's where, the issues like universal design come in. And as I said, the survey shows that persons with disabilities don't say you have different products for us, but they say, let the same universal products remain. After all, what is the challenge? The challenge is the same: to do banking, to book an airline ticket, to order food, to order a book over Amazon and things like that. They want to do the same things that everyone does. And they need the apps that bring in and facilitate those processes. Right. I thought that's the point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Arman, any words on what people in the audience here can do to promote digital inclusion? What people in the audience here can do to promote digital inclusion and for persons with disabilities?
Well, I think the audience must make it impossible for people to ignore disability. Anything that you do in your day-to-day life, you are hiring, you're going for recruitment, you're organizing an event, you're creating a technology, you going for you're traveling, anything that you do, you must imagine that a person with disability may come there, and you should imagine that a prime minister of this country in future will be on a wheelchair. Maybe a blind person can be the prime minister. Maybe the CEO of your company could be a person with a disability. We must work with that in mind and make it impossible for people to ignore disability.
Thank you so much. So thank you everybody, and thank you Microsoft for not forgetting people with disabilities and having this panel where there are two people with disabilities on the panel and we are talking about inclusion and accessibility. And thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you.